How can 4 random words be more secure than 16 random characters? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. Hey, if you're not subscribed to my weekly newsletter, Confident Computing, do so right now. Every week you'll get answers like this, tips, tricks, and more in your inbox every week. askleo.com/newsletter to sign up. So here's the question. I keep hearing about passphrases and how using 4 words, like correct horse battery staple, can be just as secure, if not more so, than 16 random characters. How's that possible if hackers need only get 4 things right in order to get into my account instead of 16? Well, the short answer is because there are many, many, many more words than there are characters. Now, at first blush, that may not seem like it's enough, but honestly, it gets better. Gotta warn you, we're going to be talking about some really, really big numbers. So let's talk about random characters first. When we think about it, the number varies depending on a number of things, but for the purposes of this discussion, we'll consider the usual set, right? Upper and lowercase alphabetics, 0 to 9, and then say 10 special characters like exclamation points or hashtags or any of that kind of stuff. So what that means then is that you've got 72 possible characters to choose for each of the positions in a traditional password. What that means then is if you do the math, the number of possible combinations of all of those 72 characters is essentially the 72 raised to the length of that password. For example, if you've got a 1-character password, there are 72 possibilities. If you've got a 2-character password, then there are 72 times 72 possible combinations. 3-character password, 72 times 72 times 72, also known as 72 to the third. At the 8-character password, which is it's not even the bare minimum anymore, it's below the bare minimum, but an 8-character password, 72 to the 8th, 72 times itself 8 times, gives you, 722 trillion, 204,136,308,736 possible combinations. That's the last one where we can actually start using reasonable English, right? Approximately 722 trillion combinations. For 12-character passwords, in other words, 72 to the 12th, you end up with a number that is, let me see here, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 23 digits long. It's 1.9 times 10 to the 22nd. I have to use scientific notation for this, mostly because that's the only way we can really think about these really, really large numbers. The good news here is that we really don't care about the numbers themselves. What I'm going to care about is the order of magnitude. So what I want you to pay attention to in this example is that 10 to the 22nd. That is the order of magnitude of the number of possible different passwords you can get using a 12-character password where you have 72 characters to choose from. For 16, it is 5.2 times 10 to the 29th. In other words, a significantly larger pool of possible passwords. And for my favorite, 20-character passwords, it's 1.4 times 10 to the 37th. So there's 1 followed by 37 zeros possible different combinations of a 20-character password where you're using 72 different characters. So like I said, we'll talk about the orders of magnitudes here to compare. 10 to the 14th is less than 10 to the 29th, which is the comparison of the 8-character password to the 16-character password. So why do we care so much about the possible combinations? Well, when you think about it, that's what a brute force attack is all about. A brute force attack literally tries every possible combination. When I started with my facetious example of a 1-character password where there were 72 possibilities, you can imagine it's very easy to just try all 72 possibilities. Same thing for a 2-character password. You've got 72 times 72. You could probably work through the few hundred different possibilities there are. When it gets to an 8-character password, obviously you and I are not going to do that manually, but that's where technology comes in. 8-character passwords can be attempted in seconds, less than seconds, using a computer to do the work. When you start looking at 12 characters, it starts to take a few months worth of computer work. When you look at 16 characters, it takes a few million years. And when you take a look at 20 characters, it's a number larger than even I can imagine in terms of the amount of time that it would take for computers. And I'm not just talking about a computer. I'm actually talking about a network of graphics processors and, basically the best state-of-the-art technology we have today. It's going to take a really, really long time based on the length of your password. That's why I say 12 characters, honestly, a few months, they're not going to try. 16 characters is going to future-proof you as the technology gets better. What takes a few million years today? Yeah, okay, fine. In a few years, it's probably only going to take a few thousand years, but that's still plenty to keep you protected from a brute force attack. Now, let's talk about random words instead of characters. The issue with random words is we need to assume some number of words. We need to know how many words there are available to be used. And honestly, there's no real agreement on that. It depends on exactly what you want to look at. For example, my research came up with a few interesting numbers. It is possible that there have been 1 million words ever in the English language. The Oxford English Dictionary, traditionally referred to as the largest dictionary of the English language, and I mean that both in terms of content, but in terms of size, physical size. It's a multi-volume dictionary, if you've ever seen it in person, 600,000 words. There are roughly, apparently, 170,000 words that are in use, in common use today. And then we take a look at around 30,000 words in the average person's vocabulary. So we'll run with those last two numbers. 30,000 words in the average person's vocabulary and maybe 170,000 words that are actually in use today. A 4-word passphrase then means that you would have, starting with 30,000 possibilities for the first word, 30,000 possibilities for the second, 30,000 for the third, and 30,000 for the fourth. In other words, 30,000 times 30,000 times 30,000 times 30,000, also known as 30,000 to the fourth, the number of words. That is roughly 8.1 times 10 to the 17th. If we use 170,000 words instead, a 4-word random phrase gives us 10 to the 20th. If we used a 5-word passphrase, well, common vocabulary would give us roughly 10 to the 22nd. All current words would give us something like 10 to the 26th. Now, if you focus on just the orders of magnitude we've talked about here, the numbers really don't look that impressive. In fact, most of them are kind of less than our standard for random characters. 10 to the 17th, 10 to the 20th, 10 to the 22nd, 10 to the 26th. These are the numbers that we're getting by using the various combination of words. Whereas with random characters, we were quickly at over 10 to the 22nd possible passwords with just a 12-character password. And unfortunately, it's at this comparison that most people stop. But so far, we've been comparing apples to oranges because we're overlooking something very, very distinctive about multi-word passwords. And it's very simple. What we haven't considered with multiple word passwords is the fact that passwords are case sensitive. In fact, they are sensitive not just to the words we use, but perhaps even the characters we might put in between the words. So yes, if you use a password that is all lowercase with no separators, correct horse battery staple, for example, with nothing in between, all lowercase, then yes, a hacker that is testing only, all lowercase, no separators, we'll probably crack it in some number of times if in fact they're even looking at trying to crack word combinations. But the reality is that's not what we do. Even the canonical example of correct horse battery staple is usually capitalized and has spaces in between. As soon as you start factoring in upper and lowercase characters into the mix of multiple word phrases, things get really, really big, really, really fast. But unfortunately, here's where it is really, really hard to quantify exactly what happens. So let's make some really gross assumptions. Let's assume that the average length of a word is 5 characters. So what that means is, for every word you might use, there are a bunch of different combinations of capitalization, each of which is unique, each of which, as far as passwords are concerned, are a completely different word. So, for example, let's say that A, 5 characters, was a word. All lowercase is one word. A, uppercase A is another word. A, uppercase A is another word. There are 32 possible variations of capitalization on a 5-character word. Suddenly, our word list increases by a factor of 32. Multiplying by a factor of 32, our list of the 30,000 commonly used words, or words in an average person's vocabulary, suddenly becomes well over 1 million and well larger than even the OED's list of words. If we start doing the math, a 4-word passphrase would then result in 10 to the 24th different possible passwords. 5 words would be 10 to the 29th, putting it on a par with 16-character random passwords. And that's not even factoring in interword spacing. All you really need to do to make the easy to remember, easy to type, 4 or 5 word passphrase as secure or even more secure than that completely unmemorizable random character string is this. Choose capitalization, perhaps a capitalization scheme of your own making. Instead of using initial caps, maybe use trailing caps, use the last character of every word or something like that. Put a character between the words. Maybe it's a space, maybe not. Maybe use something else of your own thinking. And maybe, just maybe, pull a word out of the archaic word list that you might use in all your passphrases. That right there is going to prevent a hacker from using common word lists or even current word lists to successfully try and crack anything that you're doing with a passphrase. Now, I do have to throw in a quick aside. Honestly, the real reason that multi-word passphrases are significantly more secure than random character passwords is because they're typically longer. Hackers are not actually trying to do brute force attempts against multi-word passphrases because there are just too many combinations, right? But it's still a really long password, so even a traditional brute force attempt isn't going to work. What will work is any other way your password gets exposed. So if you fall for a phishing attempt, if you have a keylogger on your machine, or any other way that your actual unencrypted password can get compromised, then yes, it doesn't matter how strong or how long your password is. If somehow they can capture it as you're typing it, or over your shoulder, or by having you type it into a phishing page, the password's been given away. But to protect yourself from brute force attempts, Multi-word passwords are absolutely more secure and, bonus, so much easier to remember. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/158497. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.